The sun was brutal that afternoon, baking the pavement until the heat waves shimmered like ghosts above the road. Leo, a scrawny 15-year-old, stood by the gas station entrance, a rag in one hand and a spray bottle in the other. His arms ached from scrubbing windshields all day, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Every dollar counted. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, eyes darting toward the convenience store's sliding doors. The cashier had already warned him twice, "Stay out of the way, kid. You're bad for business." Not like he had much choice. School was a luxury he couldn't afford, and his mom's hospital bills weren't going to pay themselves. So he worked. Every single day. As he knelt down to scrub the mud-streaked tires of a black sedan, a deep, rumbling vroom made him pause. The kind that sent vibrations through the pavement before you even saw the machine. A biker. Leo barely had time to stand before the motorcycle screeched to a stop right next to him. The rider, a burly man with a leather jacket and a thick beard, swung a leg off the bike. His boots hit the ground with a heavy thud. "Hey, kid. You scratch my ride, and I swear you'll regret it." Leo stepped back, raising both hands. I didn't touch it, sir. Just cleaning cars." The biker's eyes narrowed. "You calling me a liar?" Leo's stomach nodded. He'd seen guys like this before, big, loud, full of pride, and looking for someone smaller to step on. Before he could say another word, the man grabbed the rag from his hands and whipped it across his face. "You want to be useful? Wipe my boots, boy." Laughter erupted from a few bystanders near the gas pumps. Leo felt his face burn. Not from the slap of the rag, but from the humiliation. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides. His mother always told him, "Pick your battles, Leo. Some fights aren't worth it." But this one felt different. And then, a voice cut through the heat, the noise, and the shame. A voice so familiar, so unmistakable, that even the biker hesitated. "That's enough." Leo turned. And standing just feet away, arms crossed, sunglasses low on his nose, was Tom Cruise. The crowd went silent. The biker's smirk faltered. Leo's breath caught in his throat. What the hell was happening? Leo's pulse pounded in his ears as the weight of Tom Cruise's words settled over the gas station like a storm cloud. The biker stiffened, eyes darting toward the Hollywood star standing just a few feet away. A ripple of whispers spread through the onlookers. Some reached for their phones, others just gawked in stunned silence. But Leo? He didn't dare move. Years of growing up on the streets had taught him one thing: when a bigger dog enters the fight, you don't celebrate, you brace yourself. "And who the hell do you think you are?" the biker spat, stepping toward Tom. Tom didn't flinch. He just stood there, arms still crossed, head tilted slightly as if he were sizing up an opponent before a stunt. "Someone who doesn't like bullies." His voice was steady, but there was a quiet intensity beneath it, one that made Leo's skin prickle. The biker scoffed. "Yeah? Well, this ain't a movie, pal. This is real life. And in real life, kids like him don't get a free pass." He turned back to Leo, taking another step closer. The scent of motor oil and sweat clung to the guy's jacket, and his beady eyes locked onto him like a predator sizing up its prey. Leo swallowed hard. His feet felt like they were glued to the pavement. This wasn't the first time he'd been put in his place. At 13, he got kicked out of a grocery store just for looking suspicious. At 14, a manager at a fast food joint refused to let him use the bathroom, assuming he was some homeless kid looking to cause trouble. And now, at 15, here he was, getting treated like dirt because he was just trying to make an honest buck. His hands curled into fists at his sides, but he didn't raise them. What would be the point? Tom Cruise could say whatever he wanted, but Leo knew how this worked. He was just a poor kid scrubbing cars. And men like this biker? They always won. The biker smirked, like he could read Leo's thoughts. "You see, kid, guys like me? We don't take orders from washed-up actors. And we definitely don't take 'em from little nobodies like you." Leo's heart pounded harder. The man wasn't just trying to humiliate him anymore, he was trying to make an example out of him. A nervous sweat slicked his palms. His gaze flicked to Tom, who hadn't moved an inch. Why wasn't he stopping this? Why wasn't anyone? Then, just as the biker raised a hand, whether to shove him, slap him, or worse, the growl of another engine filled the air. Deep. Thunderous. Commanding. And then the ground trembled. Leo barely had time to turn his head before he saw it, a monstrous black truck rolling into the gas station. The driver? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And he did not look happy. Leo's breath hitched as the massive black truck rumbled to a stop, the sheer size of the vehicle making the gas station suddenly feel much smaller. The biker hesitated, turning his head toward the truck as the door swung open. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson stepped out. The entire gas station seemed to hold its breath. A few customers near the pumps stopped mid-conversation, their eyes locked on the Hollywood powerhouse. Even the cashier inside, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up, mouth slightly open. Leo felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly smothered by the reality of his situation. Hope wasn't something he could afford. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't strong, rich, or powerful. He was just some kid washing cars, getting put in his place by a man who saw him as nothing. And in front of everyone, that man wasn't done yet. The biker sneered, rolling his shoulders as he turned back to Leo. "Oh, great. Another tough guy. You Hollywood types really think you can show up and play hero?" Leo barely heard him. His stomach clenched as he felt the stares burrowing into him. Some people looked amused, waiting for more drama. Others exchanged glances, their silent judgment louder than words. Should I just walk away? The thought pressed against his mind like a weight on his chest. Maybe if he just left now, the humiliation would end. The biker would get bored, the crowd would lose interest, and he'd go back to being invisible. But walking away wouldn't change what had already happened. It wouldn't erase the laughter. It wouldn't take away the sting of the rag across his face. And it sure as hell wouldn't make the anger boiling inside him disappear. His hands curled into fists again, his nails digging into his palms. The Rock took a step forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over the gas station pavement. His expression was unreadable, his jaw tight, his presence enough to make even the bystanders shift uncomfortably. But the biker? He only grinned wider. "What, you gonna knock me out in front of everyone?" he taunted. "Gonna show the world how a big action star handles some lowlife like me?" The Rock didn't say a word. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Leo. For the first time, someone really looked at him, not as a nobody, not as a problem, but as a person. Leo swallowed hard, his throat dry. Then, a voice broke through the tension. "Kid, just apologize and move on." Leo's breath caught. He turned his head, searching for the source, a man near the gas pumps, shaking his head. "Yeah," someone else mumbled. "Not worth the trouble." A woman near the entrance of the convenience store whispered something to her friend. She looked at Leo like he was pitiful. And that hurt more than anything else. Leo felt his stomach twist. They think this is my fault. They think I should just accept it. Because guys like him always win, and guys like me? We're nothing. The biker must have sensed it too, because his grin turned cruel. He took a step closer, leaning in just enough for Leo to feel the heat of his breath. "See, kid," he murmured. "Nobody cares." Leo's heart pounded. He looked at Tom. At the Rock. At the people watching. And suddenly, he knew, the worst part wasn't what had already happened. The worst part was still coming. Leo stood there, feeling small, the weight of 100 silent judgments pressing down on him. The biker's words cut deeper than any slap could have. Nobody cares. He wanted to argue. To scream. To fight back. But what was the point? His eyes darted around, searching the faces in the crowd. Some people turned away, pretending to be distracted by their phones. Others stared, waiting for the next move like they were watching a show. The cashier inside the convenience store leaned forward against the counter, whispering something to a coworker. One of the gas station attendants shook his head before going back to stocking shelves. Nobody was going to step in. Even The Rock and Tom Cruise, who stood just a few feet away, weren't moving yet. Maybe they were waiting for the right moment. Maybe they wanted to see if Leo would stand up for himself first. But right now, he felt alone. His throat tightened. His chest burned with the weight of it all, the humiliation, the exhaustion, the unfairness of it. He wanted to just disappear, to sink into the pavement and never have to scrub another car windshield again. This wasn't how his life was supposed to be. He thought of his mother, still hooked up to machines in the hospital, her once strong hands now fragile and weak. He thought of the nights he went to bed hungry so she could eat. He thought of the kids at school who laughed at him for smelling like cleaning supplies because he spent his mornings washing cars instead of sleeping in. And now here he was, a grown man making a joke out of him, and not one person cared enough to stop it. Leo clenched his fists. His nails dug into his palms, but the pain was nothing compared to what was happening inside him. The biker tilted his head, amused. "What's the matter, kid? Cat got your tongue?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. And just when Leo thought it couldn't get any worse, a voice. Not loud. Not aggressive. But sharp. And calm. That's enough. It wasn't The Rock. It wasn't Tom Cruise. It came from inside the convenience store. The biker froze, his smug expression faltering for just a split second. Some of the bystanders turned, their curiosity piqued. Leo's heart pounded. He turned toward the glass doors, squinting past the glare of the midday sun. The store employees had stopped moving. One of them, the cashier who had been whispering earlier, now looked confused. He leaned toward his coworker, whispering again, this time more urgently. Another gas station worker, who had been stacking chips near the entrance, paused mid-motion, his brows furrowing. Something was happening. The biker sensed it too. He glanced toward the store, his smirk slipping ever so slightly. What the hell? More whispers. A man standing near the slushy machine inside took a step back, gripping his cup tighter. Then, the doors slid open. And the moment he stepped out, everything changed. Leo's breath hitched. The biker straightened. And the gas station? It went dead silent. Because standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, sunglasses low on his nose, was Tom Cruise. This time, he wasn't just observing. This time, he was here for a reason. He took a slow step forward. The air felt thicker. The tension sharper. Then, in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, he asked, "What exactly are we doing here?" Tom Cruise took another slow step forward, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. The heat from the sun pressed down, but the real pressure in the air had nothing to do with the weather. The biker let out a forced chuckle, shaking his head. "Oh, come on. This?" He gestured toward Leo with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "This is nothing. Just teaching the kid a little respect. No harm done." Tom tilted his head, pausing for a moment. Then he spoke, calmly, but with weight. "Respect?" His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. "I'm curious. What part of this," he motioned toward Leo, "looks like respect to you?" The biker opened his mouth, hesitated, then scoffed. "The kid's got an attitude problem. Thinks he can stand in the way, scratch up people's rides, act like this place is his personal playground. Someone's gotta put him in his place." A low murmur spread through the crowd. One by one, people were starting to shift. Customers who had been silent before were now watching differently. A few near the gas pumps exchanged glances. A woman holding a grocery bag from the convenience store folded her arms. Leo felt it. The tide was turning. Tom let the silence stretch for a second before he spoke again, still eerily calm. "You know," he said, removing his sunglasses and slipping them into his pocket, I've met a lot of people in my life. Athletes. Soldiers. Businessmen. The toughest guys you could imagine. The biker frowned, shifting on his feet. Yeah? So? Tom took another step closer, standing just a foot away now. His voice didn't change, but somehow, it carried even more weight. And not one of them, he said, his eyes locked onto the bikers, needed to prove how tough they were by picking on a kid. Silence. The biker forced out another laugh, but it sounded thinner this time. Oh, give me a break, man. It's just a joke. You slapped a rag across his face, Tom said, his tone neutral but unyielding. You told him to wipe your boots. You let a crowd watch while you humiliated him. A few heads in the crowd nodded. The murmuring grew. The biker's jaw clenched. I didn't. Tom didn't let him finish. He lifted a hand and gestured to the onlookers. Let's ask them. Leo's heart pounded as Tom slowly turned, his gaze sweeping over the customers, the workers, the strangers who had watched it all happen. No one spoke at first. Then, a voice broke the silence. Yeah. I saw it. Leo turned toward the voice, the gas station attendant. The one who had been stocking shelves before. Another voice. The woman near the grocery bags. You laughed at him, she said, looking straight at the biker. A man near the pumps nodded. You were having fun at his expense. And just like that, the shift was complete. The biker's face darkened as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just some kid anymore. This wasn't just some passing moment he could brush off. The crowd was turning against him. Tom Cruise didn't need to yell. He didn't need to threaten. He had just held up a mirror. And the biker? He didn't like what he saw. The biker's face was turning red now, not from anger, but from something far worse. Humiliation. His gaze flickered around the crowd, desperate for someone, anyone, to back him up. But no one did. Even the people who had chuckled earlier, the ones who had stood by in silence, now looked different. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others refused to meet his eyes. He let out a sharp breath, forcing a smirk. Look, man, this is all getting blown way out of proportion. I was just messing around. His voice lacked its earlier confidence. It was weaker now. Less sure of itself. Tom Cruise tilted his head, considering the words, then, with the same quiet intensity he had carried from the beginning, he said, if this is how you mess around, you might want to rethink who you are. The words hit harder than any punch. The biker's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. But he didn't dare make a move. Not with the Rock still standing nearby, watching him like a wolf eyeing a wounded animal. Finally, with a muttered curse, the biker turned back to his motorcycle. He yanked his helmet off the seat, jammed it over his head, and revved the engine. A desperate escape. As he peeled out of the gas station, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. And just like that, he was gone. The final word. Tom turned back to Leo. The kid was still frozen, still processing. You okay? Tom asked, his voice softer now. Leo nodded, but he wasn't sure if it was true. His hands were still shaking. His chest still tight. He had spent so much time believing that guys like the biker always won, that the world would never give him a break. And yet, here he was. The Rock clapped a hand on Leo's shoulder, nearly knocking the air out of him. You stood your ground, kid, he said with a grin. Not bad. Leo let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Hope. A new beginning. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Leo looked at the rag still clutched in his hand, the same rag that had been used to humiliate him. He tossed it into the nearest trash can. That moment? That version of himself? It was done. Because after today, he wasn't just some kid washing cars anymore. He was someone who had stood his ground. And nothing would ever be the same again. The biker was gone. The roar of his motorcycle had faded into the distance, leaving only the soft murmur of the gas station. The crowd that had once watched in eager anticipation now trickled away, returning to their cars, their conversations, their daily lives. But for Leo, nothing felt normal anymore. His heart was still racing. His palms were still damp with sweat. He felt lighter, somehow, like he had been carrying a weight on his chest for years without realizing it. And now, suddenly, it was gone. He wasn't sure how to feel about that. Tom Cruise was still there, standing just a few feet away, watching Leo carefully. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about his presence that made Leo feel safe. Then, from inside the convenience store, the cashier pushed open the glass door and called out, "Hey, kid." Leo turned, half expecting another insult. Instead, the cashier lifted a hand and tossed something at him. Reflexively, Leo caught it. A bottle of cold water. "On the house," the cashier said with a nod before disappearing back inside. It wasn't much. But it was something. Leo looked down at the condensation forming on the plastic. He wasn't sure why, but his chest tightened at the small gesture. The Rock let out a deep chuckle. "See? People aren't all bad." Leo exhaled a shaky breath. He wasn't sure what to say, so he just twisted the cap off and took a long sip. Final consequences: it wasn't long before a police cruiser rolled into the gas station. Leo stiffened as two officers stepped out, scanning the area before approaching the store clerk. The man gestured toward the road, explaining something that Leo couldn't quite hear. The Rock crossed his arms. "Guess somebody called it in." Leo swallowed. What would happen now? Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. Probably nothing serious. If the guy doesn't have a record, he'll get a warning. Maybe a fine. Leo wasn't sure how he felt about that. A part of him wanted justice, wanted the biker to suffer for what he had done. But another part of him. Did it even matter? The guy had already lost in the worst way possible. In front of everyone. Leo had always believed that power belonged to people like that, the ones who pushed others down. But today, he had seen something different. Today, he had won. And the biker? He had to live with that. A quiet moment. Tom turned to Leo. "You sure you're okay?" Leo nodded, but Tom just raised an eyebrow. "I don't know," Leo admitted. Tom gave a small smile. "That's fair." The Rock clapped Leo on the shoulder again, a little more gently this time. "You're tough, kid. You handled that better than most people would." Leo didn't know how to respond to that. He had spent so much of his life trying to survive that he never stopped to think about whether he was handling things well. For a long moment, they just stood there, watching as the world slowly moved on. And for the first time in years, Leo let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, his life could be different. The gas station felt quieter now. The tension that had wrapped around Leo's chest all afternoon was finally loosening. He glanced at Tom Cruise and The Rock, two of the biggest names in Hollywood, had just stood up for him. That thought alone felt surreal. But as the last of the crowd disappeared, as the police cruiser pulled away and life at the gas station returned to normal, Leo realized something. It wasn't their presence that had changed things. It was him. It was the way he had chosen to stand there. To endure. To face the moment instead of running from it. For the first time in his life, he hadn't just taken the hit, he had held his ground. And that was what mattered. Leo exhaled and turned toward Tom and The Rock. "I don't know how to say thanks for this." Tom smiled. "You don't have to." Leo hesitated before shaking his head. "No, I do." He let out a breath, glancing down at the worn sneakers on his feet. "I've spent so much time thinking people like me don't get moments like this. That we just have to take what the world gives us." But, he looked up. For the first time, he felt taller. Maybe that's not true. The Rock grinned. "It's not." Leo nodded, turning the water bottle in his hands. The condensation had mostly faded now, the ice inside melted. He could feel himself changing. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. He turned back to Tom and the Rock. You know, next time, I think I'll be the one stepping in. Tom grinned. Good. The Rock laughed. Now that's what I like to hear. Leo smirked, feeling the smallest flicker of confidence spark in his chest. Because in the end, it wasn't about who had power. It was about who chose to use it the right way. And if today had taught him anything, it was this: respect isn't given by force. It's earned by character. Final CTA, smoothly integrated, Leo looked at the gas station around him, the place where he had once felt invisible. Not anymore. Maybe someone out there felt the same way he had. Small. Unimportant. But they weren't. So if they ever found themselves in a moment like this, he hoped they'd remember, sometimes, the real win isn't fighting back. It's standing tall.